Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. As I imagine just about all of you to know, but it seems appropriate to say it, my name is Joseph Kearney, and it is a great privilege for me as Dean of Marquette University Law School to welcome you to this event. We will this afternoon welcome into our Pro Bono Society a substantial number of Marquette law students, or if you prefer, and for some of you it is really close, future Marquette lawyers. We have done an admission or induction ceremony along these lines for the past several years, and the Pro Bono Society itself was established during the tenure of my predecessor, the late Dean Howard B. Eisenberg. The numbers have increased over the years, and you, the students whom we induct each year, truly do inspire us. Of more recent creation than the induction part of the ceremony, but now also a tradition in its own right, is the way we begin, and that is to say the Posner Pro Bono Exchange. Through this, we honor the memory of the late Gene Posner, a member of our class of 1936, who was a lawyer, entrepreneur, and philanthropist here in Milwaukee. It's right that we should honor his memory because much of the pro bono work that the law school provides has been enabled through a multi-year gift of the Gene and Ruth Posner Foundation, which is led by Gene's grandson, Josh Gimbel, a lawyer in Milwaukee with the firm of Gimbel, Riley, Guerin, and Brown. In particular, the foundation has supported our creation of the position that is held by Angela Schultz. She has led us not only in preparing for this particular event, but far more broadly in working with our students on so many of their pro bono placements. In fact, since we last gathered a year ago, Angela has been promoted to Assistant Dean for Public Service, Dean Schultz, that is. I thought that to be a terrific promotion, and it is certainly well-deserved on the merits. Angela waited a couple of days until after the promotion to tell me that her father's first name is Dean, and so primarily I had added to confusion in the family by suddenly creating a second Dean Schultz. I had the privilege to meet Gene Posner a number of times after becoming Dean, before he passed away at the age of 90 in 2005. I got a sense of the man in any number of respects, but surely my knowledge of him pales in comparison to that of Josh Gimbel. And so I would invite Josh to say a few words, whether it's by way of remembering his grandfather or more generally by way of introduction.
Thank you, Dean Kearney. It's always a pleasure to be here today. As Joe mentioned, my grandfather graduated from here in 1936, quite a while ago. He practiced law for well over 60 years. And he always had a profound interest in making sure that law students knew the importance of providing pro bono services once they graduated. And he felt that the best way to do that was to help support the initiative here that promotes it within the law school, because certainly by doing it here at the law school while you're a lawyer, you're more likely to do so again when you're a practicing lawyer. He knew that we have a monopoly on legal services and only we can provide those services, and many people cannot afford them. So it's imperative that you carry on after your graduations, those that are graduating this year and those that are graduating in the future, and keep doing that. I know some familiar faces around here from my days serving at the Milwaukee Justice Center, and I know you've worked there and other places, and I know my grandfather would be super proud to be here to see all of you. I understand that it's our largest group ever, over 120, right? Well over 120, that's wonderful. Just for some background on myself, my father also is a graduate of this fine law school, as well as my brother Todd. My father graduated and was last night honored here in the atrium for his Lifetime Achievement, Alumni Lifetime Achievement Award. If you ever have a chance, once that speech is online, I encourage you to see it because it will inspire you to be great practitioners and carry on the fine tradition of a Marquette lawyer. The only thing else I would add is that I'm really thrilled that Angela and Katie have done such a remarkable job. I think that the Posner Foundation money was well spent and will be continued to be well spent as long as you are shepherding it in the right direction. So I'm thrilled to be here. Congratulations to all of you. Jeff, it was nice meeting you, and I look forward to hearing from you. And Mike, it's always a pleasure to hear you do your interview. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Josh. Mike Gousha, who is our distinguished fellow in law and public policy, will once again lead the pro bono exchange. It will be with Jeff Colman. Jeff is, like Josh, not a Marquette lawyer, but awfully close. That's the case in terms of his lineage. Jeff is the son of Roz Colman and the late Fred Colman, the latter a Marquette lawyer of our class of 1948. It's the case in terms of his affinities. Jeff is a supporter of the law school in a number of ways, including his service on the Law School Advisory Board. And most generally, and perhaps most importantly, it's the case in terms of his approach to the practice of law. Simply stated, Jeff's pro bono work and leadership in the bar have been extraordinary, both in Illinois and nationally. Examples range from his defending Guantánamo Bay prisoners to his chairing both the Illinois Supreme Court's Committee on Post-Conviction Review of Death Sentences and the Court's Commission on Access to Justice. His many honors include the Chicago Bar Association's John Paul Stevens Award, bestowed in 2012 for his commitment to integrity and public service. I want you to know much more about Jeff, but he is right here, as is Mike Gousha, and so let me hand it over to Mike, and as I do, please join me in welcoming Jeff Colman.
Thank you, Dean Kearney, and I'd like to just say congratulations in advance to our students who are here today, and also to welcome their friends and family to this event, which is always a lot of fun. And we'd like to welcome Jeff Colman, too. It's great to have you here. I thought we might lay a bit of foundation for our conversation today and have people understand what drew you to the law. Let's begin there.
Well, as Joe Kearney, as the dean said, our father was a Marquette lawyer, and he was passionate about justice. He was passionate about Marquette, where he went as an undergraduate and as a law student. But he really deeply cared about justice, and it's something that he instilled in my brother, who's here, and our sister, and it's something that my mom also instilled in us. I do remember two things in particular about my dad and justice, and one of them may not be familiar to the younger people here, but in 1957, the Milwaukee Braves won the World Series. And we were living in Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin, and the World Series victory was immense. And Hank Aaron was the star of the Milwaukee Braves. Milwaukee did the equivalent of a Wall Street ticker tape parade to celebrate Hank Aaron and the Braves. And a few months later, for one of the very few times in my experience, I saw my father crying in the chair that he would sit in with the newspaper, and I asked him what was wrong. I was 9 years old. And he told me that the paper reported that Hank Aaron could not buy a house in Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin. And he could not. Hank Aaron ultimately bought a house in Mequon, but he couldn't. Places like Whitefish Bay excluded not just African Americans, but Hank Aaron, the hero of Milwaukee, from living in the community.
So that left a mark with you.
It sure did.
Yeah.
And then when I was in high school, Anthony Lewis wrote the book Gideon's Trumpet. My father gave it to me. I read it. For those of you who are familiar with Gideon versus Wainwright, it's obviously about the constitutional right to counsel when you're facing a prison or substantial jail term. The extraordinary thing about the book, to me then and to this day, was that when the United States Supreme Court took Gideon, the Attorney General of Florida sent around a letter, this is way before email, and asked the Attorney Generals of all the other states to sign an amicus brief supporting the state of Florida in its opposition to the right to counsel in felony cases, in essence. And two attorney generals, Edward Brooke, the Republican Attorney General of Massachusetts, and Walter Mondale, the Democratic Attorney General of Minnesota, got that letter, and they put together a group. Someone here may know the exact number, but approximately 16 or 17 attorney generals ended up filing an amicus brief on behalf of Mr. Gideon and the right to counsel in criminal cases. It sounds like we're talking about a foreign planet. when you think today about the opposition among Democrats and Republicans and liberals and conservatives. But at least back then, and I still think today for many people, justice goes way beyond political boundaries. And those were the types of things that our father instilled in us.
I want to walk through certain highlights of your career and then bring it back to the practical applications for today's students. And I know you felt strongly when we talked earlier about making sure that the people in this room knew the incredible value you could provide to someone's life and just by doing pro bono work. And it doesn't have to be high-profile pro bono work, such as some of what we're going to talk about today. I want to first give people an idea in your current role. You have paid clients, but you also do pro bono work. Describe a little bit for us what it is you're doing these days.
Well, most of what I do in the paying world is representing lawyers and law firms in professional liability cases. These are usually enormous cases that involve 5 or more lawyers at our firm. Frequently legal malpractice. With the downturn in the economy back in 2008 and 2009, one of the big trends has been for companies that fail, receivers get appointed or bankruptcy trustees come in and they sue anyone with a deep pocket, and that's frequently law firms and accounting firms and banks and officers and directors. So that's the majority of the work that I do these days in the paying world.
And Joe mentioned some of the pro bono work that you do. I mean, it's pretty remarkable stuff. I mean, representing, for example, prisoners at the detention facility in Guantánamo in Cuba. Let's start there and spend a couple of minutes on that. It's a fascinating case. President Obama, before he was elected, said he was going to close Guantánamo. He has said that since he's been elected, but it is still open. Why did you feel it was important to represent prisoners being held in Guantánamo?
The answer to that question is different in terms of what motivated me originally when I decided to do it and how I feel about it today. In 2004, the United States Supreme Court ruled that these men imprisoned at Guantánamo had a right to seek habeas relief in federal court in Washington, D.C., and had a corollary right to lawyers. And an effort was being made to seek volunteer lawyers to do that. My reason, in direct response to your answer, Mike, for doing it was I believe people who have a need for lawyers should have lawyers. And that was it, pure and simple. It was like agreeing to do any other matter for an indigent person. That was my motivation. I am not a human rights lawyer. I am not a civil rights lawyer. I'm not really much of a criminal defense lawyer. But I deeply believe that what all of you who are third-year students are about to embark upon is a noble profession where you really have a chance to help people in need. Not every day, not every minute of every day, but it's what you have a chance to do. And it's a wonderful service you can provide for people, and at least for me, it makes me feel good as a human being. So that's why I got involved. Over the years, I have to tell you, what we have done at Guantánamo is a disgrace. It is shameful. 2 days after President Obama was inaugurated, he did issue an executive order saying the place would be shut down in 1 year. By January 22 of 2010, I was one of 8 lawyers who were invited to the White House the next week to meet with legal counsel to the president and others to talk about how that was going to happen. And it hasn't. And there are 2 shameful things about this to me. And when I say this, I know that's a strong word. There are lots of shades of gray in the Guantánamo situation. I am not portraying this as everything is right or everything is wrong. There are a lot of judgments that every person who thinks about Guantanamo and reads about it, you'll have to make for yourself. But there are two things that are shameful to me. One, we have held and are continuing to hold innocent people there with no charges and no trials of any kind. And two, if you want to assume that some of the men there are horrible human beings, if you just want to assume that, it's taken us more than 7 years in a military commission context to put some of these men on trial, and we haven't done it. When you think about where you were, you third-year students 2 years ago, the horrors of what happened in Boston on the day of the marathon 2 years ago hurt most of us the way the horrors of 9/11 hurt us. Within 2 years, they were able to bring to trial in a Article III federal court the alleged terrorist, now convicted terrorist, responsible with his brother for 9/11. And yet we have people at Guantanamo, like Sheikh Khalid Mohammed, the alleged mastermind of 9/11. He's been there since 2007, and we can't bring him to trial. That, to me, is shameful.
You say it damages our standing internationally.
Absolutely.
That we've moved away from what, our strict adherence to the rule of law in this country?
There are dictators around the world who hold up Guantanamo as the example as for why we, the United States, should not be proclaiming what they should be doing. They arrest journalists in some country. They detain them with no charges, and our State Departments and diplomats say to them, you shouldn't be doing that. And the response is, well, what about Guantanamo?
Can you briefly tell us about some of the work you did at Guantanamo, the prisoners that you met with, that you represented?
There's one of the questions that you'll all ask yourself at some point in your career is, how do you feel about representing someone who you think is really a bad person? People will ask you, how do you feel about representing someone who you think is guilty? And maybe that's a subject for another day, because let me tell you, I had 4 clients at Guantanamo. None of them should have been there for 1 day. None of them. I had a client, so the question for me is, how do you feel about representing someone who you're really convinced is innocent and you can't do anything about it? So let me give you one example. I represented a man, 38-year-old high school principal in Saudi Arabia, father of 3, pregnant wife. Every year of his adult life, as part of his profound Islamic faith, he did 30 days of charity work from the time he was, I believe, 18. 9/11 happens. He hears about our bombing in Afghanistan, the U.S. bombing. He goes to the administrator of his school district. He gets a 30-day leave of absence to go volunteer to work at an orphanage in Afghanistan. He gets a round-trip plane ticket to fly to Pakistan, gets transportation arranged. He goes to an orphanage in Afghanistan. He's there for less than 1 week. The bombing was so intense that they evacuated the orphanage. He comes back to Pakistan, and he's turned in, we believe, for a ransom as an enemy of the United States, because he was an Arab from Saudi Arabia who had been in Afghanistan. I can tell you 2 things. One, all of us who did this work signed protective orders that prohibit me from talking about anything that's classified. So anytime I talk about Guantanamo, especially when it's being videotaped, I make a point of saying,
Is that happening here?
Yes, I am not talking about anything that's classified. Let me tell you, secondly, never, ever, ever was it alleged that this man possessed a weapon, was trained to fight, or fought against anyone. The only allegation ever made against him was that the orphanage that he visited for less than 1 week had received some funding from an Al-Qaeda-related humanitarian organization. Based on that, he's detained in Pakistan, he's sent to Guantanamo, he spent 4 years and 10 months at Guantanamo, the last 10 months as my client, with no allegation that he did anything wrong. So I saw him 3 times, and each time I left Guantanamo, I have to leave this man locked up by our country that I love, and there was nothing I could do about it. At that point, you couldn't go to court because Congress was engaged in a whole set of rigmarole politics with the courts and the executive branch that many of the scholars here know about. It went from 2004, the first Supreme Court decision, until 2008, the third, before we could actually go to court in these cases. He was released after 4 years and 10 months, but he was an innocent man. He shouldn't have been there ever.
You've represented clients on death row. And I'm wondering if you might share with the students and with the folks who are with us today the story of a gentleman that you called Antonio. It's a fascinating story, and I'd like you to talk about the facts of the case, but then I want to talk about the meaning of the work that you did for him, the meaning of it to him, and the meaning of it to you. So tell us a little bit about Antonio, who was on death row.
Antonio is a dear friend of mine who is now a free man. He spent 27 years in prison from the time he was 16 until he was released 3 years ago. Antonio would tell you if he were here, and he may very much want to come and talk here. He has spoken at law schools in Chicago. His mandatory 3-year parole ends on July 13th, when he'll be free to travel much more than he is right now. But Antonio, the first chapter of Antonio's life was horrible abuse, vicious abuse, mainly at the hands of his father. Fist, belts, pipe, scars, badly abused. That led, by the time he was 12 years old, to drugs, alcohol, gangs, no school, and in his words, I was a despicable and horrible teenage kid. When he was 16, he killed a 49-year-old man who was sexually abusing him. He pled guilty, he got 35 years in prison, he goes off to prison, and someone in prison says to him, "Why'd you plead guilty? That guy was abusing you." And Antonio says, correctly, well, the judge and the prosecutor told me that if I didn't plead guilty, I could get the death penalty. Another prisoner says to him, that's crazy. 16-year-olds can't get the death penalty in Illinois. So Antonio files his own pro se, on his own petition, to set aside that guilty plea. I've seen the transcript. The judge and the prosecutor said, if you decide you want to go to trial, you could get the death penalty, which was just wrong. So Antonio's fighting that. In the meantime, he's now 21 years old. He's in state prison, and he gets into a fight with another inmate, and he kills another inmate. He goes on trial in 1991 or 1992, and he is sentenced to die for killing that man. And the judge, in sentencing him to die, says, you're a despicable human being. There is nothing redeeming about you. And Antonio goes off to death row. He's fighting both cases with other lawyers for a number of years. Governor Ryan of Illinois in 2002 commuted the death sentence to life in prison, along with all other death sentences in Illinois. In 2007, I was appointed to represent Antonio, who by this point had gotten the original guilty plea set aside. He had gone to trial. He was sentenced to life without parole because by this point he had the prison murder, and it becomes a merry-go-round. The federal judge in Chicago who appointed me to represent him in challenging the murder that occurred when he was 16 found outrageous prosecutorial misconduct in that case, set aside the conviction, We then went back to the prison case and said because he had been sentenced to die based on the guilty plea in the earlier case, which was now vacated, we should get a new sentencing hearing. And we did that 3 years ago. A judge, new judge, the judge who had sentenced him to die was now deceased. A new judge found after 2 days of hearings that Antonio was totally rehabilitated. We had 5 correctional officers testify to what a wonderful human being he had become. I don't know how much time we have, let me read you one thing that Antonio said about this. When he went off to death row, he met a man named William Bracey, and Antonio writes, or said to the court, every day Bracey would talk to me. Every day he would share something with me. He would tell me about the horrible things he had done. He told me how God had changed his life. He shared with me the importance of being humble, being respectful. I didn't have to be aggressive and mean in order to be respected, he told me. He taught me that kindness was not a weakness. He would talk to me, and as the years went by, he became a good friend. He was probably the only male person I had in my life until that point who didn't take advantage of me or abuse me. So Antonio, in the case that he had been sentenced to die in, was resentenced to 20 years in prison, which he had already served. Credit for good time. In the meantime, we had to retry the case that occurred when he was 16 years old. And for those of you who have studied it, we were waiting anxiously for the United States Supreme Court to rule in 2012 in the case called Miller versus Alabama. In June of 2012, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that it violates the Eighth Amendment cruel and unusual punishment clause to mandatorily sentence a juvenile murderer to life without possibility of parole. Even though Antonio was 44 years old in 2012, for purposes of the law, he was 16 years old at the time the offense occurred. The state's attorney was telling us that mandatory life was the only punishment that he could get. They refused to negotiate with us, so the day that Miller was decided, in June of 2012, we were ready with our fingers crossed for a positive decision. We went into the Circuit Court of Cook County that day and filed an emergency motion asking for the immediate release of our client on the ground that he had already served the maximum possible penalty provided by law. The state wanted to brief it. Within 3 weeks, they agreed that if he would plead guilty, they would immediately release him, and that's what happened.
And describe for me his life today, and describe for me what that experience meant to you.
I'll tell you in my words, and then if I could read one more thing from him, I'd like to. He's a dear friend for my wife, for myself, for colleagues. A very good friend of mine who's a senior executive at a company in Chicago got Antonio a wonderful job. The first day when we picked him up at the prison, because he had to be transferred from jail back to the prison to be released, he was afraid to walk across the street. He did not know how to open a car door. In the days from 27 years ago, you had to push a button and then pull the lever. He was not familiar with a contour door handle. He had never had a driver's license. He now has a driver's license. He got an apartment after many rejections because he had to honestly report that he has 2 murder convictions on his record. But he has a wonderful woman friend who's very supportive. He has a great family who is very supportive and good friends. And he wrote me, as he was getting out, the following in a letter. I know without any doubt that this would not be possible had it not been for you. I have thought long and hard of what words to say to express how grateful I am for everything you have done. And you is plural. Everything I've done is with many colleagues, many people helping. So this is not just me by any stretch of the imagination. There are no words that can express the level of appreciation that I feel. What do you say to the people who gave you your life back, the people who made your dream of 27 years come true? So to answer my own question, what do I say to you? I won't say anything. I will let my actions express my sincere appreciation. I will dedicate the rest of my life to be the best son, friend, and neighbor that I can be. I will try to be as kind a human being as possible and help those, particularly young people, to not go down the roads that I have taken.
And for you?
For me, this is, to some extent, symbolic of what you can do every day. If you can help someone save their house, if you can help someone with their child custody arrangement, if you can help someone with a debt and sometimes an onerous debt collection company on the other side, if you can help someone in bankruptcy court, if you can help people in almost any aspect of their lives, you're doing something that as lawyers, we should all feel privileged to be doing. That's what it means to me.
I was struck by something that Jeff sent me. And he had penned a column called Regrets. And to quote a line from a famous song, I guess you've had a few, but he talked about the fact that when he got into the business of being an attorney, he had hopes and dreams, and that you wanted to give real meaning to this notion of equal justice under the law. And yet you said, despite some things that may have improved a bit in the justice system, there's been little change in terms of improving equal justice, and in some cases, it's markedly worse, the justice system today, than the one you entered years ago. Why do you feel that way?
You could spend 3 years in law school talking about the answer to that question. And I wrote that trying to actually be a little bit provocative. Mm-hmm. It didn't provoke much of a response, I'm sorry to say. There are two things that I think are really important to say. Number one, we've made so many aspects of our lives in the United States dependent on the law, more than 40 years ago, so that now you literally have hundreds of thousands of litigants every day across this country who are in our courts over everything from sometimes traffic matters, small claims matters, to fundamental issues about their family life, their children, their homes, their apartments, and they can't afford legal counsel. And unlike the marketplace of Kohl's versus Walmart versus Macy's, where there is some competition, the courts have a monopoly here. There's no choice. And the courts frequently present fearful, intimidating, unhelpful venues for people to walk into, whether it's in the lobbies or in the courtrooms themselves, and we haven't addressed those issues. And the other side of the coin is we have a lot of young lawyers who are looking to accept these challenges. So we have the legal resources, some of them are here in this room, and we need to find a way in the months and years ahead to take advantage of the great skills that you are learning and will learn so that you can meaningfully be employed and help people.
So what do we do to encourage pro bono service? I know you've been active in this in the state of Illinois, trying to do that. What would you recommend?
I'm opposed to mandatory pro bono. I think it should be voluntary. I'm really in awe looking at this room, at the students here who have committed to do the pro bono work that you have. All I would say is, if all of you will continue to do this in the years ahead, and if your colleagues in Madison and in Chicago and in Indiana and in New York will do the same, and if we can find, there's pro bono, and I think in one of your programs, someone referred to it as low bono. I don't know how many of you have heard that term. At one of our Access to Justice Commission conferences, a woman got up and, addressing justices of the Supreme Court and members of the commission, said, you're talking about pro bono. You keep talking about pro bono. But for many of us who are solo practitioners, what we engage in every day is low bono work. And she went on to explain that she frequently would get a retainer from a client of $500 or $300 to do a particular matter, and then never get paid another penny, and that she never turned her back on those clients. And so that was the first time I had heard the expression low bono. Josh is smiling. Even in large law firms, you go through low bono as well. It happens that clients do not pay, and you continue to do the work and try to do your best. But I think the bar needs to take responsibility for this. I know that on the Wisconsin Access to Justice website, they announced that Wisconsin is now one of only 3 states in the country that has no public funding for legal aid, and that's regrettable. Illinois, which has public funding for legal aid, is at the bottom of the most populous states on that public funding. Of the 10 most populous states, Illinois is 10th in public funding. But foundations, like the Posner Foundation, bar associations, bar foundations are promoting pro bono work all the time. In Chicago, there's an incubator program now taking young law school grads who have not been successful in finding jobs and working with them to develop in an entrepreneurial way their ability to practice law in a low bono type atmosphere. So there are lots of creative approaches, but the work is out there. It's finding a way to do the work and make a living and feel good about what you're doing.
I'll give you about a minute for a closing statement if you'd like. That seems fitting, doesn't it?
I think the only thing that I wanted to say that I didn't is don't think that pro bono work has to be limited to litigation. That's my background. But for those of you who are not litigators, and I'm sure at your clinics here, you can do work for arts organizations, for community organizations, for other not-for-profits, for religious organizations, for small businesses. Some of the programs that you have here, they have in Chicago as well, writing wills for firemen, policemen, veterans, doing tax returns for people who can't afford to pay H&R Block and need their taxes done. These are all very valuable forms of pro bono work where I'm guessing you'll feel a lot better helping someone do their will than I did leaving Guantánamo with my clients there.
Jeff Colman, we appreciate your thoughts and your advice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both. I myself think that so much of education really does involve providing examples or even exemplars, and that requires that we have them. And I'm really grateful, Jeff, that you would come back to your hometown as you do from time to time and to be with us. And we are interested in exploring further possibilities with you along those lines. So let's now direct our attention directly to our students. They have not quite yet earned the appellation of Marquette lawyers, as Jeff's father once did, but they have already distinguished themselves, and it really is an awesome sight, as Jeff said, in terms of their commitment to some of the best ideals of the legal profession. In particular, even while students, even while concerning themselves, or I should say yourselves, with courses, including internships in the community, and even with the frequent need to find some remunerative work, given the financial exigencies that law school imposes. Even in these circumstances, you have provided pro bono work. And you, whom we honor this afternoon, but I'll note this for the benefit of others, have met really rigorous criteria in terms of your pro bono work. You have provided at least 50, and in some cases 120 hours of work that has been, it kind of reads like a statute, A, not for academic credit or compensation, B, supervised by a licensed attorney, C, primarily legal in nature, and D, so that's in the conjunctive, not the disjunctive, and D, in service of the indigent, those who otherwise lack access to justice, or a nonprofit whose mission is to do the same. I promised earlier to give everyone a sense of the specific ways that our honorees have gone about this, or at least some of the places and projects. Last year I gave a top 10 list. This year let's focus first on the Marquette Volunteer Legal Clinic and proceed not by top 10 but rather by day of the week, just to get a sense as to how some 228 law students at Marquette Law School worked at the Marquette Volunteer Legal Clinics over the past year and served some 4,256 clients. So Mondays, the students were at the Milwaukee County Veterans Services Office, and they were supported by a range of attorneys. Many of the law students and attorneys at the VSO are themselves veterans or former service members. Tuesdays, the students were at the House of Peace, again supported by a range of attorneys, including, in her second retirement, the indefatigable Julie Darnader. I want to note that our House of Peace volunteers, in addition to being at 17th and Walnut and answering the questions of the folks who walked in, also have begun to answer questions posed to Judicare's Northern Wisconsin Legal Assistance Project. That's a new online legal advice tool for residents of Wisconsin's 10th Judicial District. And if you don't have the map of the 10th Judicial District emblazoned in your mind because you're studying for my advanced civil procedure exam right now, and it is in the supplemental materials for that course, the 10th Judicial District is nowhere near here. So this has allowed our law students and lawyers in Milwaukee to help provide brief legal advice to folks in the northwest corner of our state. Wednesdays finds us, or you, on the south side. We had our last clinic at Centro Hispano's Hillview building in December and started serving the same population at the United Community Center, or UCC, in January. Both at Hillview and now at UCC, we serve 50% monolingual Spanish speakers. So that is to serve a real need in this community. The students at this clinic work with lawyers from Quarles and Brady and from the American Immigration Lawyers Association, along with a handful of other practitioners. Thursdays and Fridays finds the MVLC at the Milwaukee Justice Center. Thursday's attorney coverage is provided by Foley and Lardner, along with a group of other attorneys. Friday's attorney coverage at the MVLC at the MJC, which I believe is still at the MCC. Friday's attorney coverage is provided by four firms, Michael Best and Friedrich, Hinshaw and Culbertson, Reinhardt, Berner, Van Duren, and O'Neill, Cannon, Holman, DeYoung, and Lang. The MVLC is even up and at 'em on various Saturdays and some Thursday mornings through the Mobile Legal Clinic, which is staffed by Michael Best. So all of this is not even to mention the non-MVLC programs, the programs that we offer, whether by ourselves or as often in partnership with others. These include the Domestic Violence Injunction Hearings Project, the Wills for Veterans Clinics, the Know Your Rights trips to the Kenosha Detention Center, the Pan-African Community Association's Refugee Help Desk, the Metro Milwaukee Foreclosure Mediation Program, the Guardianship Clinic, and the Marquette Legal Initiative for Nonprofit Corporations all come to mind, and even that is not an exhaustive list. So altogether, 56% of all Marquette law students involved themselves in pro bono work this past year, collectively providing some 10,833 hours of pro bono work. I say some 10,833 hours of pro bono work just in case there's another hour or two that went unreported. But Dean Schultz is pretty precise in the accounts that she gives to Dean Parlow and me. So in terms of new Pro Bono Society members, we have 128 inductees this year, some 80 of whom are with us this afternoon. 50 hours constitute a substantial amount of time to devote to pro bono work. We are really so impressed and so grateful for what you as students do. And some members, as I have mentioned, have achieved the additional distinction of 120 hours. In all events, warm congratulations and thank you to all of you for your work as new members of the Law School's Pro Bono Society. We will proceed with Dean Schultz's reading the names, whereupon we would ask each individual to come forward, and it will be my privilege to give him or her a certificate representing your induction into the Pro Bono Society. So, please.
Thank you. And before I do, I just need to thank Dean Kearney. I also need to thank Josh Gimbel, and I think Dean Parlow is in the room as well, for the support that our Office of Public Service gets, the very real support that they get from these people, these players who envisioned the office, make it a reality, and allow us to do the service work that we do. I also want to just invite those of you, particularly those of you graduating, to keep me in mind as an ongoing resource so that as you do build a pro bono practice in the next chapter of your life, remember our clinic doors are open for you to volunteer, but there are so many other pro bono opportunities available in the city that you might just want to explore in addition to the clinic or instead of the clinic. I'm a resource to help you navigate those things, so remember that, and you know where to find me here. So without further ado, I'm going to start over here. Janetta Ademi. Brian Arsenault. James Ballard. Andrew Belter. Aaron Block. Rebecca Borkovic. James Bowers. Joshua Bryant. Kelsey Barassan. Jonathan Burkett. Joel Chappelle. Stephen Clark. Nicholas Conradi. Nathan Cromer. Larissa Dahlman. David Del Busto. Jessica Dickman. Tristan Dollinger. Elizabeth Eddy. Jenny Eck. Kirk Emick. Jamie Epstein. Carolyn Garsky. Zachary Guerin. James Galnick. Michael Gregory. Angela Harden. Amy Hart. Tyler Helsel. Grant Henderson. Bruce Hilty. Kristen Hoffman. Crystal Jones. Aaron Caprillion. Nicely done. Elizabeth Kendall. Michael Kessler. Melissa Klein. Christopher Cradle. Kevin Lassiter. Andrea Lau. Jenny Lee. Patrick Leo. Lauren Medente. Kelsey Mader. Molly Madonia. Samuel Magnuson. Bryant McFadden. Karen McKenzie. Angel Medina. Paul Miller. Catherine Mills. Rebecca Nelson. Avery Nemeth. Amanda Nimmer. Isioma Nwabusor. Excuse me. Sorry, Isioma. I've done that better. Colin O'Mara. Casey Parks. Megan Pirix. Rachel Retsky. Candy Reyes. Patrick Ruel. Alexa Sanders. Armand Shonchak. Nicholas Schrader. Angela Shin. Jessica Simons. Peter Smiley. Nicholas Sulpicio. Nicole Swanson. Ashley Swick. David Szymanski. Philip Thompson. Cassandra Van Gompel. Morgan Van Royen. Joseph Wasserman. Derek Waterstreet. Cameron Weitzner. Dina Weldon. Brian Whitehead. Natalie Wisco. Elizabeth Wood. And Claire Zyber. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I thought that was terribly artful, the way you recruited some more lawyer volunteers for our clinics, as I would expect. So I said thank you, I believe. I certainly meant to say thank you to each of you as you came up, and I think that's the correct word. One could say congratulations or well done or any number of other things, and it would be appropriate. But I say thank you because I think that what we are doing here is not only to serve individuals, but also really to build a new Marquette University Law School. I regard that as something that is continually in progress, but I do think that it is the responsibility of all of us who are associated with the Marquette University Law School community, whether we are faculty or alumni or even students, to try to ensure that the spirit and the ideals of the place are not just served as they are found when we come to the place, but also improved and enhanced. And I would say that in my going on 18 years at Marquette University Law School, having arrived here as an assistant professor under Dean Howard Eisenberg at the time, that while we may not be a better place in all respects, I do think that the way that our alumni and students have captured and secured and promoted for us the pro bono ethic that Howard himself personally exemplified, but made it really something that is an institutional commitment, makes us an unquestionably better place. So in terms of more specific thank yous than that, I certainly want to say thank you again to Jeff Colman, also to Josh Gimbel and the Posner Foundation, and I do agree with Josh. We do want you to go and look at the 4 minutes and 56 seconds. His son tells me that Frank Gimbel spoke yesterday afternoon. That itself was an accomplishment on our part, because Frank is a trial lawyer and he's very good at it. But it's a very good 4 minutes and 56 seconds. Thank you to the law firms and the lawyers who partner with us, but most especially, again, thank you to all of you who are students, whether you are returning next year as students or whether you are returning next year as Dean Schultz has pretty well required as attorney volunteers. We really do admire the work that you have done and the work that you're going to do. We look forward very much to your work as Marquette lawyers. I hope that everyone's going to join us outside the room right here in the Zilber Forum for a reception. Thank you.